all come to see me, ladies and gentlemen? Well, I should never have expected this. Oh, well, it's really extremely kind of you. I'm very glad to see you. You know, I'm very glad you've come.
This is Theater Talk. I'm Susan Haskins. We're going to celebrate one of the great playwrights of all time, George Bernard Shaw, with two of the great men of the theater today. And here to introduce them, he's great in his own strange way, Michael Real of the New York Post.
Shaw's great play Man and Superman was performed 100 years ago this year in New York for the first time, and it's a good excuse to talk about the great playwright, and I'm very pleased to have on the show with us tonight ERIC BENTLEY, the great critic, playwright, scholar, and the author of Bernard Shaw, a terrific book, biographical critical survey of Shaw's life and work, out from Applause Books. And we are also joined by, I think, the great Shavian actor in America of this generation, Philip Bosco, who has appeared in New York in Major Barbara, Miss Alliance, You Never Can Tell, St. Joan, The Devil's Disciple, and that great Shavian masterpiece, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, on Broadway. Welcome, Phil.
Thank you,
Eric.
Michael.
All right, Eric, why read Shaw today?
Why not?
That would be the shaming answer. What does he still have to tell us about?
Well, why use the word still? It's you could have said these things 50 years. People were saying, "Why read Shaw?" in the time of Shaw, people were hating him and neglecting him. Mm-hmm. So I don't accept the question.
You don't accept the question.
He's a great author that not everybody likes. That's, and fashion, you know, it'd come in a little more. Like, in the theater, go out a little more. So I think he's in the same position now that he was 50 years ago.
Really?
Or even 100.
So he was never accepted. I mean, one thinks of him now as being, you know, a great celebrity of his day and a celebrated man of the day, but that was never really the case. He was neglected by many people.
Well, he was a revolutionary after all. He, in what was becoming the Cold War, he was on the Russian side, not the American side, in such things, which was a problem here. You know, he lectured here in New York, I mean by here, at in the Metropolitan Opera House, 1931, the very midst of the financial crisis of the world. His lecture, in its British version, was entitled "The Political Madhouse in America and Nearer Home." He didn't believe in the party system as both England and the United States have it, so he was highly unpopular, you could say, but nevertheless he got invited to speak from the stage of the Metropolitan Opera House, which I don't think any other playwright has ever done.
Yeah.
So it's paradoxical. You know, when he was dying, the journalists were filling the village where he lived, which had no hotels, so they'd be kind of sleeping in the garden, etc. And he'd been told he only had hours to live. And they sent the Daily Mail, I think it was, offered him £1 million for a final statement.
£1 million?
Since he wasn't going to be there to
Collect it.
so he dictated to whoever was on hand, "It has been said." That's great, isn't it?
How could you not like
the vulgarity of offering a dying man £1 million?
That's showbiz.
British journalism takes the cake, doesn't it?
Phil, when did you first in your life come across the plays of Shaw? When, as a young man, reading them, seeing them?
No. As a matter of fact, my first Shaw play happened to be the play in which I got my equity card.
Really? Which was?
It was my first professional as a theater actor. I started as a radio actor when I was a kid. That's another story. But when I had come back from the army in 1953, I guess it was, after having been in Europe for a couple of years, I came back and went back to school at Catholic University, where I went to drama school. And that summer of my return, I was cast as the lawyer Boone, who was the son of the waiter, and You Never Can Tell. And I got my equity card and that wonderful part as well. And my love affair with Shaw started with that.
Really? It's said we don't see Shaw all that much in American stages because it's just too difficult for American actors to handle the speech. Do you think that is the case, and how were you able to do it?
I think it is the case, and I deplore it. I think it's sad. And if I may get a little contentious now, I think the root of that disagreement of how to approach these things lies with this idolatry with respect to the actor's studio, which I think has done more harm than good for the betterment of the American theater in general and of American actors and actresses in particular. There's no concentration on the single most important aspect of an actor's equipment is his voice, for heaven's sakes. And if you can't speak properly with variations and with nuance, etc., you can't do Shaw or any other.
So it's relevant that you started as a radio actor.
Well, it didn't hurt.
Because there you had to impose yourself without the visual image.
Indeed, and I love radio acting. I think it's a marvelous way to they don't do it anymore, unfortunately.
Do you agree with that, Eric? That it's sort of the actor's studio style of acting that has made it difficult for actors in America to do Shaw?
Well, yes, and what we could now call actor's studio was there in some fashion before and was true then. I've gone blank for a moment.
Sorry. We were talking about the
speech. Yes, lots of critics, in fact, all of the newspaper people, including on your paper, I'm sure, have always said it's all talk, talk, talk.
Yeah.
Shaw used to like to quote that and used to talk, talk, talk. Yeah. And he'd say, that's true, just as Michelangelo's paintings are all paint. In other words, what is written is it.
Of course.
As in Shakespeare, as in Shaw. And he should be criticized. If you want to criticize him, you should criticize what he wrote, not for having written it. But the other aspect of it that I don't think Phil will disagree with is, although it has to be spoken and spoken beautifully or correctly, if he's using different dialects, you have to get them right. The American assumption that if you do that, you're not doing the part emotionally, you're not getting the emotional life of the part, is quite false.
Indeed, absolutely.
And a good actor, like Philip or like my late friend Uta Hagen, she would understand this. When she played Mrs. Warren, for instance, Mrs. Warren is in a big emotional situation throughout the play, which has an emotional climax near the end. You have to get that inner life of the character, even though it's Shaw, and you've been told he doesn't have any, characters don't have an inner life, they just talk, talk, talk. But the talk, in the case of Mrs. Warren, when she's talking with her daughter, has the life conflicts just as much as any of the plays that the Actors Studio do.
Of course.
You're nodding vehemently about this.
Absolutely.
You agree completely.
Yes.
If I may just add that the interesting thing about scenes in which people are dealing in words and ideas, like, say, the scenes in St. John of Warwick and Cochon, which they talk about Protestantism and things. They're talking about Protestantism, but they're not talking about it in a detached, purely discussing way. His plays are not plays of discussion. These men stood for those ideas, like these, like the bombers today. Stand behind with their ideas of Islam. It's a theory, but it's grounded in emotion and feeling. So on the one hand, you have to deal with the primacy of speech. The playwright deals with words. On the other, the words come from the heart, not just from the head.
You agree with this, playing Shaw. Can you give us an example of a character that you've played where the emotion is as raw, as powerful as any modern contemporary American play?
Well, I can give you a classic example of it for me personally. I've done the character of Mendoza in Man and Superman, but I've also played several times the third act, which Charles Lawton originated in the concert version, just the third act.
The third act is the one that takes place in hell.
Yeah,
the
it's
famous
called Don Juan in Hell.
Don and Juan in Hell.
I've done that a number of times, and it's extremely successful. But these people are very, very emotionally committed to their points of view in here. If you just excerpt that from the play itself, I mean, they're vociferous about their emotional connections with their feelings about these things. You know, the life force, I mean, just drives them. And the part that I play in it, Mendoza becomes the devil.
Right. It's a wonderful part.
It's a wonderful part, you know. Yeah. And they're filled with them. How can you not play them? Yeah. With that kind of emotion? I don't understand. Never did. This kind of categorization of Shaw as being devoid of you can't call upon your emotional life. No, that's nonsense. It makes no sense.
But let me ask you though, Eric, didn't Shaw play into this though characterization of him being devoid of true emotion by being so flip and funny and jokey about everything, creating the Shaw personality of the clown, not to be taken seriously?
Yes, well. It's ambiguous, and he himself criticized himself for that. He said to Hesketh Pearson, his first biographer, that when Hesketh Pearson said, "Do you mind if I, put in my objections to your political theories in the book?" And Shaw said, "You can say what you like about and disagree as much as you want." He said, "But don't write one of those debunking biographies. Don't debunk me. I need to be in-bunked." I've debunked with all my clowning, he said.
You can't beat Shaw.
You agree with that, though, too?
Absolutely, yes.
The ambiguity of his personality in that.
Well, I think his own personal. I of course am not privy to it. I don't know whether he wrote about it or not. But he had a very strange kind of life with his wife. It was rather unemotional. At least that's the impression we're supposed to get on it. He had this affair with Mrs. Patrick Campbell for so many years. So his kind of emotional, sexual life, if that's the proper way to describe it, was, I guess, very ambiguous. But I don't know as that affected his treatment of the characters that he created. I don't think he created them in his own image. I mean, they're speaking his own words, but they're human beings with flesh and blood.
With their own ambiguities, too, all these characters.
Of course, sure. I mean, what important characters aren't ambiguous to some extent?
But there's a certain detachment and dry wit that many characters have in Shaw that speak to his personality of being.
Only when it's appropriate to be that way.
I mean, you once, Eric, said he was passionate in his letters, in his that for him an erotic relationship was one carried on as a correspondence. That for him words are a function of emotion and
often the passions are not the ones people expect. Like he dealt with human relationships like any other playwright, but not always with the hero and the heroine. It's often the parent and, in Major Barbara, the father and the daughter, or the mother and the daughter. Very few playwrights have done much with those things. He was highly original. I'm a critic that often disagreed with him politically, though I'm British and socialistic. It's not a disagreement from the right. But I find him more revolutionary and more acceptable in treatment of sex. That there he was a feminist. His whole attitude to male-female on stage is quite different from the conventional Victorian one, which continues into the 20th century from the 19th, when, starting with Ibsen's Doll's House, perhaps. But see, the reason My Fair Lady has to be attacked by anyone who respected Shaw, even though it's a delightful show, in brackets. I was a reviewer at the time. I gave it a moderately favorable review, meaning it was a good show, but it's a terrible treatment of Mr. Shaw's play because it undermines the basic idea.
Yes.
Which is what? How does it undermine that?
Which is that Higgins likes to dominate women and would be capable of an affair with Eliza, possibly, but she's a modern woman, or she's going to be when he's developed her, she grows into being a woman, she values her independence more than romance, more than an affair with an interesting man. Mm-hmm. So that the process by which she becomes a woman, which means having the power to move away from a romance into an independent life in which she will dominate the man, because she will marry Freddie, who will mind the counter in the flower shop, which she is the owner and entrepreneur of.
She's not going to fetch his slippers.
Yes, indeed.
20th century woman, if you like, conceived at the no doubt at the end of the 19th. His attitude to men and women, you see, the fact that he has himself a rather odd love life, even though I'm sure we don't yet know all about it, but we can certainly show that it's unusual. A marriage which publicly denied any sexual content. And so that, but his treatment of male and female is completely sincere and inward and new, and is not even the same as Ibsen, though he took things from Ibsen. But the originality, and it's revolutionary. A feminist revolution.
Yes, it was very important.
His interest in St. Joan, you see, the title is ironic, isn't in saintliness. She wasn't a saint, in his opinion. She was a hero. She was a woman who was his kind of woman. She was Major Barbara in an affair that didn't cave in to the other side.
Shaw started out as a music critic. And Eric has pointed out in his fine study on Shaw that much of the writing in the plays is very similar to music, that one can think of Man and Superman as almost a symphony.
Indeed.
Do you feel, as someone who speaks these words, who's memorized these plays, do you think that's that is the case?
Probably, yes, to some, and certainly particularly with the Man and Superman, in which music is so much incorporated. He uses Mozart. So, well, I mean, the whole idea, you know, Don Giovanni. I mean, it's throughout the play. And I think a great case can be made, particularly since he had already been a music critic, I think, before. Was he a drama critic as well?
Yes.
But he was a music critic first,
music critic even before.
Right.
He's much more unqualified in his admiration of Mozart than he is in admiration of Shakespeare, whom he liked to attack. But that's because he regarded the Mozart works as what most enviable. And he said, I learned from Mozart how to treat deep themes with a light touch.
Why did he attack Shakespeare?
Do you think it was really serious? I don't think it
not too much, no. He tilted at Shakespeare, like Don Quixote tilting at the windmills, you know. He was a rival. But Shakespeare has terrible plots and terrible ideas. He'll illustrate from Othello, finding the illogical bits of the Othello plot and whatnot, saying we wouldn't do that now after Ibsen. But he says Shakespeare was a great musician. Well, that's a key term for Shaw. If Shakespeare was a great musician, that's the main thing to be. And he doesn't mean music in the sense of just decorative. He means that music goes to the emotional depths.
Indeed, yeah.
The arias in the women in Mozart go to the depths of their souls and their sexuality. That was a model. So his own plays are pieces of music in that sense.
But he recognized,
not just in the sense of sounding nice to the ear, but in composition, like the way
that's your point.
A sonata is constructed, which was in turn why he couldn't bear to have his plays cut. Or Shakespeare either, for that matter, his rival. Said the Victorian productions of Shakespeare tore the music to bits. You know, it's like he would say, it's like having a waltz. It's supposed to go 1, 2, 3, but they're cutting out the third beat. You can't do that with a piece of music.
Yeah.
We only have a couple of minutes left, but I did want to touch on Shaw's embracing fascism. He was criticized for this. What was that about? That towards the end of his life, what was his relationship towards Hitler coming in?
Towards Hitler, all that stuff?
Well, he was kind of a champion of Stalin in a way.
Shaw in middle life, he lost his youthful, normal, socialistic, left-wing point of view, which was to gradual, peaceful development from capitalism to socialism, and found the disorder in our society so deep that you had to have leadership, a strong man. So, and some of those that appeared in the 20s, he approved of right away. For instance, in Turkey, Ataturk, on the ruins of the Turkish Empire, made a modern, viable country. One man out of it. Shaw and many other people, not just Shaw, the whole literary intelligentsia of Europe, hailed Mussolini in this way in the 20s. In the early 30s, before Hitler actually came to power, Winston Churchill supported Hitler to the extent of saying, if England was ever in the state that Germany was in 1920, we would need our Hitler. Shaw supported Hitler to that extent. He didn't continue his support to Hitler, but what he did support was the Soviet Union from the very beginning. He also, along with Brecht, by the way, was one of the few intellectuals of that time that saw the development of the two big superpowers, one in the East, the Soviet Union, and the other in the West, America, USA. Shaw always sided in that battle with the Soviet Union, including Stalin. He's not one of those left-wingers who just celebrated Lenin but thought Stalin ruined it all. He thought the whole thing was necessary. The violence in which they remove their enemies and so on, to establish an order after which you can develop things like socialism, but which you cannot get without
the strongman, the Superman.
That is why he is still carrying on at age 94 against American action in Korea, which happened the year he died. He became authoritarian to that extent and in that way, with many other European intellectuals, by the way. It isn't an eccentricity, as it might have seemed in America, because America was really outside of all of this for a long time, or at least the public thought so. So there's plenty to argue with in Shaw's later political stuff.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, for instance, on Hitler, when Shaw learned all about what would become the Holocaust, the anti-Semitism in the 30s, he said Britain should have declared war on Hitler the moment he stole Einstein's violin. But notice the reason given is that Hitler interfered with the life of a great man. It was great men that Shaw represented.
Oh, and not
that Shaw respected. He didn't want Eisenhower. He didn't want Einstein dictated to. He didn't mind the rest of the German people. So anyway, I don't think you go to Shaw for opinion, but rather to argue things. He always makes it like he's offering you an argument and you can take issue, and you do.
Just to bring it back to the theater, though, Phil, I mean, that must be the joy of, as an actor doing these plays, because every play is full of these kind of arguments. I mean, characters in conflict all the time, and one topping each other with a different line of argument.
That's exactly the way I feel about it. Yeah. It's just so filled with interesting things that grab you.
And do you find that, even though there seems to be this resistance to doing Shaw in this town, in New York, we don't see much of it, that when it's done well in front of an audience, the audience is still absorbed in those arguments?
Oh, my heavens, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. If it's done well, if it's spoken reasonably well, you can't avoid being caught up in it. If you have a brain that's inquisitive and wants to be engaged in something, how could you not do it? It's fascinating.
Phil Bosco, ERIC Bentley, thank you very much for being our guest tonight on Theater Talk and bringing Shaw back front and center in the New York theater world.
Where he should be.
Thank you.